You thought love was supposed to be your safe haven, your sanctuary. But what happens when the person you love the most turns your life into a living nightmare? My name is Michael, and this is the story of how my dream of a perfect marriage turned into a journey through manipulation, abuse, and heartbreak. Stick with me to the end as I reveal the shocking moment that changed everything and how I finally found the strength to break free. Trust me, this is a story you won't forget. It started like something out of a movie. The moment I saw Amanda, she was standing in the corner of a friend's rooftop party in New York City, her laughter cutting through the noise of the city. She was magnetic, the kind of person you couldn't ignore even if you tried. Her confidence was electrifying, and when she locked eyes with me, it felt like the world stopped spinning for a second. We started talking, and it was as if we had known each other our whole lives. She told me about her job as a graphic designer, her love for traveling, and her dream of one day owning a little house by the beach. I was hooked. Amanda wasn't just beautiful. She was ambitious, funny, and full of life. By the end of the night, I had her number, and a week later we were on our first date. She swept me off my feet. Candlelit dinners, long walks through Central Park, spontaneous weekend trips. It was a whirlwind romance that felt too perfect to be true, and maybe it was. In hindsight, there were small red flags even in those early days. She would sometimes make offhand comments about my job, saying things like, "Being an accountant must be so boring. I could never do something like that." Stung a little, but I laughed it off, thinking she was just teasing. Then there were the little tests. She would joke about how I looked at the waitress too long during dinner or how I didn't text her back fast enough. I chalked it up to her being passionate, intense, maybe a little insecure. Love isn't perfect, right? A year later, I was down on one knee, asking her to marry me on that same rooftop where we first met. Her yes felt like the start of a fairy tale. But I had no idea that the perfect Amanda I fell in love with had a darker side. A side that would slowly unravel the life I thought we were building together. Our wedding day was something straight out of a magazine. Amanda had planned every detail with meticulous precision, from the flowers to the playlist. We exchanged vows on a pristine beach in California, the ocean stretching out behind us as the sun dipped below the horizon. Her smile was radiant as we danced our first dance, and I remember thinking, how did I get so lucky? But even on that day, there were signs. I remember the morning of the wedding when one of the bridesmaids accidentally spilled coffee on Amanda's veil. Amanda's reaction wasn't just upset, it was volcanic. She screamed at her friend, calling her clumsy and careless, and stormed out of the room. Later, she acted like nothing had happened, flashing that dazzling smile at our guests. It was jarring, but I brushed it off. Weddings are stressful, I told myself. The honeymoon was a blur of romance and adventure. We went to Maui, where we swam with sea turtles and watched the sunrise from the top of a volcano. Amanda was affectionate, loving, and full of energy, but there were moments when her mood would shift without warning. One night, we had an argument about something trivial. I can't even remember what. Amanda accused me of being too controlling because I suggested we turn in early after a long day. Her words were sharp, and for the first time, I saw a flicker of something unsettling in her eyes. Contempt. I apologized, of course. I always apologized. When we got back home, the glow of the honeymoon faded quickly. Amanda threw herself into her work, and our once endless conversations started feeling strained. She began to make little comments that cut deeper than I cared to admit. "I thought you'd get promoted by now," she said one night as we watched TV. "Don't you want more out of life?" Her words hung in the air like smoke. I wanted to say something to defend myself, but I didn't want to ruin the evening. So I stayed silent. Looking back, that silence was my first mistake. It gave her room to tighten her grip on me, to plant seeds of doubt in my mind about my worth. The cracks in our relationship grew wider in the months after the honeymoon. At first, it was subtle. Amanda would make sarcastic remarks about my appearance or my habits, often with a laugh that felt more mocking than playful. "Do you really need to wear that shirt again?" she'd say, smirking. "You look like an old man." Stung, but I told myself she was just teasing. Maybe I was overreacting. But her words began to carry more weight, her tone sharper. She started criticizing my work more openly. An accountant? Michael, come on. Don't you want to do something exciting for once? It wasn't just the comments. It was the way she said them, dripping with disdain. Every time, I tried to laugh it off or change the subject. The Amanda I married was still there, wasn't she? The woman who danced with me under the stars and whispered about our future late at night? One evening, she crossed a line that I couldn't ignore. I had spent the entire day helping her reorganize her office. By the time we were done, I was exhausted but proud of how much we had accomplished. I expected at least a small thank you. Instead, she looked around the room and said, "I don't know why I even asked for your help. It's not like you're good at this kind of thing." Her words hit me like a slap. I stared at her, waiting for a laugh, a smile, some sign that she was joking. But there was nothing, just that same cold, dismissive look. That night, as we lay in bed, I tried to talk to her about it. "Amanda, do you ever feel like you're too hard on me?" She rolled her eyes. "Oh, stop being so sensitive, Michael. I'm just honest. If you can't handle honesty, maybe that's your problem." Her words echoed in my head long after she fell asleep. Was she right? Was I too sensitive? The isolation began shortly after that. Amanda started to criticize my friends, suggesting they were immature or bad influences. "Why do you still hang out with them?" she'd ask. "Don't you think it's time to grow up?" Eventually, I stopped reaching out to them. It was easier that way, easier than defending myself or enduring her lectures. As my world shrank, hers seemed to grow. Amanda was thriving at work, attending networking events and making new friends. She'd come home late, her stories full of exciting people and experiences. I felt smaller with each passing day, like I was fading into the background of her life. There was a night I'll never forget. We had dinner with her coworkers, and I made a joke about one of Amanda's stories. It was harmless, or so I thought. But Amanda turned to me with a glare that could cut steel. "Wow, Michael," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "You're so funny. Too bad you can't make jokes like that at work. Maybe you'd be further along in your career." The table went silent. I wanted to disappear, to sink into the floor and never come back up. When we got home, I confronted her. "Why would you say that? In front of everyone?" Her response was cold and dismissive. "Stop being dramatic. If you can't take a little criticism, how are you going to survive in the real world?" It was becoming harder to ignore the growing pit in my stomach, the feeling that something was deeply wrong. But I wasn't ready to face the truth yet. I still believed in the Amanda I fell in love with, the one who had promised me forever. Amanda's control over my life didn't happen all at once. It was a gradual tightening, like a noose I didn't notice until it was too late. At first, it was subtle. She'd ask small favors, seemingly harmless requests that didn't feel like a big deal. "Can you stop hanging out with Mark so much?" she said one evening. "He's kind of a bad influence, don't you think? Always joking around like he's still in college." Mark had been my best friend since high school, but I shrugged and agreed. Amanda's happiness seemed more important. Then it escalated. She didn't just want me to spend less time with Mark. She wanted me to stop talking to him altogether. "Why do you even need him?" she asked one night. "You have me. Isn't that enough?" Her words made me feel guilty, like wanting friends outside of our marriage meant I didn't love her enough. Slowly but surely, I began cutting people out of my life. It wasn't just Mark. It was everyone. I stopped going to the gym with my coworkers because Amanda didn't trust me around other people. "You never know what people are really like," she'd say. "They could be talking about you behind your back." She even convinced me to change my phone passcode, claiming it was about protecting our privacy. But over time, it became clear that our privacy meant her control. She would check my messages, scroll through my emails, and ask why I had liked certain posts on social media. "You're hiding something," she'd accuse, her voice icy. "Why else would you act so defensive?" I wasn't hiding anything, but that didn't matter. In Amanda's eyes, I was always guilty of some imagined betrayal. At work, I started staying late. Not because I had extra projects, but because I dreaded going home. The atmosphere in our apartment was suffocating. Amanda's mood swings were unpredictable. Some days, she was loving and affectionate, like the woman I had married. Other days, she was distant, cold, and sharp-tongued. One Friday evening, she called me while I was still at the office. "Why aren't you home yet?" she demanded. "I had a late meeting," I explained, though it wasn't entirely true. "Sure you did," she snapped. "Who were you really with?" The accusation stung. I tried to laugh it off, but my voice cracked under the pressure. Amanda didn't let it go. By the time I got home, she was waiting by the door, her arms crossed. "You're lying to me," she said. "I can see it in your face." The argument that followed was one of the worst we'd ever had. I tried to stand up for myself, but Amanda had a way of twisting my words, turning every point against me until I felt like I was the one in the wrong. That night, as I lay awake staring at the ceiling, I realized how small my world had become. My friends were gone. My family barely heard from me anymore. My hobbies, my passions, my sense of self. All of it had been swallowed up by Amanda's needs, her insecurities, her demands. And yet I stayed. I told myself it was because I loved her, because marriage meant sticking it out through the tough times. But deep down, I knew the truth. I was afraid. Afraid of what my life would look like without her. Afraid of starting over. Afraid of the person I'd become under her shadow. The tension in our home became a constant presence, like a heavy fog that settled over everything. Every interaction with Amanda felt like walking on a minefield. One wrong step, and the explosion would follow. One morning, I forgot to take out the trash before leaving for work. It was a small mistake, but when I got home, Amanda was waiting for me, seething with anger. "Do I have to do everything around here?" she snapped. "You can't even handle something as simple as taking out the trash. Do you know how exhausting it is to live with someone so useless?" Her words hit like a slap. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she was already storming off, muttering under her breath about how she deserved better. These outbursts were becoming more frequent. They could be triggered by anything: a misplaced item, a forgotten errand, or even a look she didn't like. Her tone was cutting, her words designed to wound. And yet, I still found myself trying to make her happy, as if her approval could somehow fix everything. But it wasn't just the anger, it was the unpredictability that kept me on edge. Some days, Amanda would act as if nothing was wrong. She'd smile, kiss me on the cheek, and tell me she loved me. Those moments of affection felt like a lifeline, convincing me that the Amanda I fell in love with was still there, buried beneath the cruelty. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching TV. For the first time in weeks, the atmosphere felt calm. Amanda leaned her head on my shoulder, and I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, things were getting better. But then her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen and laughed. A sharp, bitter sound that made my stomach drop. "What's so funny?" I asked, trying to keep my voice light. "Just a text from someone at work," she said, her tone dismissive. When I pressed her about it, she turned cold. "Why do you always have to be so nosy?" she snapped. "It's no wonder people don't take you seriously." The warmth from earlier evaporated, replaced by the familiar sting of her disdain. Her words started to chip away at me in ways I hadn't anticipated. I began second-guessing myself at work, wondering if my colleagues saw me the way Amanda did: weak, ineffectual, not good enough. My confidence eroded bit by bit, leaving behind a hollow shell of the man I used to be. One weekend, I tried to suggest a getaway, hoping a change of scenery might help us reconnect. Amanda shot down the idea immediately. "I don't have time for some pointless trip," she said. "Unlike you, I actually have responsibilities." Her words were a dagger to my heart. But what hurt even more was the realization that she didn't see our marriage as a partnership anymore. If she ever had. The nights were the hardest. Lying in bed next to her, I felt like I was sleeping beside a stranger. The silence between us was deafening, filled with unspoken resentment and pain. I wanted to reach out to fix what was broken, but I didn't know how. As the weeks turned into months, I began to dread going home. The apartment, once our sanctuary, now felt like a prison. I told myself I could endure it, that things would get better if I just tried harder. But deep down, I knew the truth. Amanda didn't want to be saved. She wanted control, and I had handed it to her willingly. Amanda's cruelty wasn't confined to the walls of our home. It began to seep into our public life, turning moments that should have been joyful into sources of humiliation. One night, we attended a dinner party hosted by one of her coworkers. I was nervous, eager to make a good impression. Amanda, however, seemed intent on tearing me down. As the group discussed their careers, Amanda interrupted me mid-sentence. "Michael's job isn't exactly exciting," she said, laughing. "I mean, how much can you say about spreadsheets and tax returns?" The group chuckled politely, but my cheeks burned with embarrassment. I tried to laugh it off, but inside, I was crumbling. Later, as I tried to engage in a conversation about travel, Amanda chimed in again. "Michael doesn't like to try new things," she said. "He's kind of stuck in his ways." Her words felt like daggers, each one chipping away at my confidence. When I confronted her on the way home, her response was dismissive. "Oh, stop being so sensitive," she said. "It's just a joke. Can't you take a joke?" But they weren't jokes, not to me. They were reminders of how small I had become in her eyes and, slowly, in my own. Amanda's arsenal of control included a weapon I came to dread the most: the silent treatment. When she wasn't yelling or mocking me, she would withdraw completely, leaving me in a suffocating void of silence. One night, we had a minor disagreement about groceries. Something so trivial I can't even remember the details. But Amanda's reaction was anything but minor. She stopped speaking to me entirely. At first, I thought she just needed space. But as the hours turned into days, her silence grew louder than any argument we'd ever had. I tried apologizing, even though I wasn't sure what I was apologizing for. She ignored me, her eyes cold and distant. When I asked her what was wrong, she would shrug or turn away. The silence wasn't just passive, it was punishing. It made me feel invisible, like I didn't matter at all. I started walking on eggshells, desperate to avoid upsetting her again. I cooked her favorite meals, cleaned the apartment, and tried to make her laugh, but nothing worked. Her indifference was impenetrable. The loneliness was unbearable. I found myself questioning everything: what I'd done wrong, whether I was a bad husband, and why I couldn't seem to fix things. Finally, after 4 days, Amanda spoke. "I'm tired of you always making everything about yourself," she said, her voice dripping with disdain. Her words left me speechless. I had spent days trying to win back her affection, and yet she made it seem like I was the selfish one. This pattern became a recurring theme in our relationship. Every time I thought we'd reached the bottom, Amanda would find a way to dig deeper, pulling me further into the darkness. The breaking point came on a rainy Thursday night. Amanda had been distant all week, her mood shifting unpredictably between icy indifference and sharp criticism. I had tried everything to bridge the gap, but nothing seemed to work. That night, as we sat at the dinner table, I brought up the idea of couples counseling. "I think we could use some help," I said cautiously. "I want us to be happy again." Amanda's reaction was swift and venomous. "Counseling?" she spat. "You think I'm the problem? Maybe you should fix yourself first before dragging someone else into our business." Her words felt like a slap, but I pushed forward. "I'm not saying it's anyone's fault. I just think it could help us communicate better." Amanda slammed her fork down, the sound echoing in the silence. "You're pathetic," she said, her voice cold. "Always looking for someone else to solve your problems. No wonder your life is so stagnant." I stared at her, the weight of her words pressing down on my chest. For the first time, I felt something shift inside me, an ember of anger, of defiance. "I'm trying," I said, my voice trembling but steady. "I've been trying, but I can't do this alone." Amanda stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "Maybe you should figure out how to be a man first," she said before walking out of the room. Her words echoed in my mind long after she was gone. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, the ember inside me growing brighter. For the first time, I began to wonder if this was love, or something far more toxic. The weeks following that night were a blur of tension, resentment, and silent battles. Amanda's words still stung, but something inside me had shifted. I couldn't ignore it anymore, the feeling that I was losing myself in this marriage. It was a Saturday evening when the final straw broke. We had plans to meet some of Amanda's friends for dinner. I'd spent the afternoon getting ready, hoping for a pleasant evening out. But when I walked into the living room, I saw Amanda standing in front of the mirror, frowning. "What's wrong?" I asked, trying to be helpful. She turned to me, her face twisted in frustration. "Are you seriously wearing that?" she scoffed, gesturing to my outfit. "Do you even care what you look like?" I was stunned. It wasn't an expensive outfit, but it was something I felt good in. I thought I looked decent, but Amanda's gaze was icy. "You look like you're trying to impress someone else," she sneered. "You're embarrassing me." I froze. In that moment, I realized she didn't just want to control my actions. She wanted to control who I was. My clothes, my friends, my hobbies, even my appearance. Nothing was ever good enough for her. I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "Amanda, this is too much. I can't keep doing this." But before I could say more, she cut me off. "Don't make this about you, Michael. You never know when to stop. It's always about you." I felt my heart shatter. I knew what was coming. This wasn't the first time she had belittled me, and it wouldn't be the last. But something inside me snapped. "I can't live like this anymore," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air, heavy and final. Amanda looked at me with cold indifference. "Then leave," she said flatly. "You're not going to change, and I'm tired of pretending you're something you're not." Her words struck like a cold blade, but I didn't flinch. For the first time, I felt a sense of clarity. This wasn't a marriage, it was a prison. I stood there, frozen, as Amanda's words echoed in my mind. "Then leave." It felt like a permission slip, a door I had been too afraid to open. But now, standing on the threshold, the weight of everything we had been through crashed down on me all at once. I took one last look at her, at the woman I had once loved so deeply, the woman who had once made me feel like I was enough. There was no warmth in her gaze, no sign of the partner I had imagined I'd spend my life with. She was a stranger now, and I was a shadow of the man I used to be. I turned away, walking toward the door. The finality of the moment hit me like a wave. My heart ached, not just for the love that was lost but for the version of myself I had left behind. As I stepped into the hallway, I heard Amanda's voice call after me. "Don't come crawling back when you realize what you've lost." Her words were meant to wound, but they didn't affect me like they used to. I was done. The apartment door clicked shut behind me, and for the first time in years, I took a deep breath, feeling a sliver of freedom. It was a strange sensation. Freedom and fear, both at once. But there was no going back now. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing. I had to rebuild myself. I had spent so long trying to please her, trying to earn her love, that I had forgotten how to love myself. The next few weeks were a blur of emotions. There were days when I felt lighter, like I could breathe again. But there were also moments of doubt, when I questioned my decision, wondering if I had made a mistake. But every time those thoughts crept in, I reminded myself of how I had felt living under her thumb, how she had suffocated me with her demands, her control, and her cruelty. The fear of losing her had kept me stuck, but now that she was gone, I realized how much I had lost in the process. I wasn't ready to be okay. Not yet. But I was ready to start. In the weeks following the breakup, the silence was deafening. I was alone, in a way I hadn't been in years, and it felt both freeing and terrifying. The loneliness wrapped around me like a blanket, but beneath it, there was a quiet sense of relief. Amanda had been my whole world, and now she was gone. But the life I had built with her had hollowed me out. I spent my days going through the motions, work, meals, sleep, but nothing felt real. The weight of the past still clung to me, and I struggled to shake off the guilt. Had I been weak? Was I foolish for staying as long as I did? I asked myself these questions daily, but the truth was, I was beginning to realize that I had made the right choice. I wasn't a failure. I was surviving. The days stretched into weeks, and I began the slow, painful process of rebuilding my life. The apartment felt different now, emptier, but in a way that was more honest. No more constant tension, no more walking on eggshells. I had space to breathe. I took long walks, trying to reconnect with myself. I'd forgotten how much I loved the simple things. Watching the sunset, reading a book at a coffee shop, laughing with old friends. It was strange at first, like I was a stranger in my own life. But slowly, I found pieces of the person I had lost. I started going back to the gym, something I hadn't done in years. The first few sessions were rough, but it felt good to push myself. I was doing something for me, not for anyone else. I also reached out to Mark, my old friend. I hadn't realized how much I missed him until we sat down at a bar one evening and talked like we used to. He listened without judgment as I poured out everything I had been through. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was alone. But even with all the progress, there were days when the memories of Amanda haunted me. Her voice, her accusations, the way she made me feel like I was never good enough. The emotional scars were deep, and sometimes they resurfaced when I least expected it. I wasn't sure if I'd ever fully heal, but I was learning to live again one day at a time. Months had passed since the breakup, and though the pain still lingered, something had changed inside me. I wasn't just surviving anymore, I was starting to thrive. My confidence, though fragile, was slowly returning. I had learned to set boundaries, to speak up for myself, and to say no without feeling guilty. One evening, I decided to take a chance and go on a date. I'd met Rachel through a friend, and she seemed different, kind, genuine, and with a sense of humor that reminded me of the person I used to be. We met at a quiet cafe, and it was as if the weight of the past had lifted, even just for a little while. We talked about everything: life, dreams, the silly things we loved, and for the first time in so long, I felt like I could breathe. I wasn't comparing her to Amanda. I wasn't afraid of what might go wrong. I was just myself. Rachel didn't rush things. We took our time, letting the connection grow naturally. There were no unrealistic expectations, no demands, no pressure. It felt easy in a way that was both unfamiliar and comforting. That night, as I walked home, I realized something important. I was worthy of love, not because I could fix someone else's brokenness, but because I was enough as I was. As the months went on, I started to truly let go of the anger and resentment that had once consumed me. It wasn't easy. Sometimes, the memories of Amanda's cruelty would flare up like an old wound, but I began to understand that holding onto that bitterness was only hurting me. One afternoon, I found myself scrolling through old photos of Amanda and me. There were good moments mixed in with the bad, moments when we were happy, when I thought we had everything figured out. But even then, there were signs I had ignored, red flags that I had brushed aside because I wanted to believe in a fairy tale. It hit me then. The relationship wasn't just unhealthy for me, it was toxic for both of us. We had both lost ourselves in the struggle to be what the other wanted, and in the end, we were both left broken. I took a deep breath and deleted the photos. Letting go of the past wasn't about erasing her, but about freeing myself from the weight she still held over me. I needed to move forward. It was time to stop looking back. Time had a way of healing, and slowly, I began to feel whole again. My life was different now, calmer, more intentional. The chaos that had defined my relationship with Amanda had faded into the background, replaced with a sense of peace I hadn't known I was capable of. Rachel and I were still seeing each other. She was understanding and patient, never rushing me, always giving me the space to figure things out at my own pace. We had our own rhythm, one that felt natural, not forced. For the first time in a long while, I was learning what it meant to love without fear. There were no mind games, no manipulation, no controlling behavior. It was simply two people getting to know each other, flaws and all. I realized I didn't need to settle for a love that made me feel small. I deserved someone who would support me, not tear me down. Someone who would grow with me, not against me. As the days went by, I felt lighter. The emotional scars from my past with Amanda would always be there, but they no longer defined me. I wasn't just Michael, the husband who had been abused. I was Michael, a man who had fought through the pain and emerged stronger. And as I stood on the edge of this new chapter, I knew one thing for certain. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was finally living. As I reflect on everything that has happened, I can't help but feel a sense of gratitude. Not for the pain, but for the lessons I've learned through it. My journey wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I spent years trying to fix something that wasn't meant to be fixed, and in the end, I realized that the most important relationship I needed to repair was the one with myself. If you're reading this and going through something similar, whether you're in an abusive relationship or you've just come out of one, please know that you're not alone. The road to healing might be long, but it's worth it. You are worthy of love that lifts you up, not one that tears you down. If you've experienced something like this, I'd love to hear your story. Please share it in the comments below. And if this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. We can all learn from each other's journeys, and together, we can heal and grow. Take care of yourselves. You deserve it.